I'm Janet, 26 female. I live in the two-story colonial house where I took my first steps, the same one my dad brought my mom home to as a newly married couple. He left it to me, and only me, when he passed away. For the past 4 years, it's just been my mom and me, navigating our grief together, but now everything has changed. This story is about how my own mother, manipulated by her new husband, tried to kick me out of my own house, and how I had to use the very legacy my father left me to take my life back. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The silence in the house after Dad died was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It wasn't an empty silence. It was heavy, filled with everything that was no longer there. His booming laugh, the sound of the game on TV, the scent of the wood polish he used on his antique desk every Sunday. I was 22, fresh out of college with my degree in architectural drafting, and suddenly the co-head of a very broken household. My mom, Sandra, seemed to shrink. The vibrant woman who hosted neighborhood barbecues and led the PTA became a ghost in her own home, drifting from room to room. Our life became a quiet routine. I'd go to work at a small architectural firm downtown, losing myself in the clean lines and precise angles of blueprints, and she would spend her days at the local library where she worked part-time. We'd eat dinner together, talk about nothing, and then retreat to our separate corners of the house. It wasn't happy, but it was stable. It was a peace forged from shared loss, and it was as fragile as a pane of glass. We were two people holding our breath, afraid that the slightest exhale would shatter what little normalcy we had left. The first crack in that glass was named Gary. Mom met him at a grief and recovery seminar that her friends had pushed her to attend. She came home one evening with a different light in her eyes, a hesitant spark I hadn't seen in years. She told me about Gary, a financial advisor who had lost his wife a few years back. "He just gets it, Janet," she said, twisting a napkin in her hands. "He understands." I wanted to be happy for her. I truly did. A part of me was relieved that someone else might be able to lift the suffocating blanket of sadness from her. But from the moment I met him, something felt off. Gary was 56, impeccably dressed, with a smile that was a little too bright, a little too practiced. He had a way of looking around a room, not at the people, but at the things. When Mom introduced us in our living room, his eyes scanned the crown molding, lingered on the mahogany bookshelf my dad had built, and I felt a prickle of unease. He wasn't seeing a home, he was assessing assets. He laid the charm on thick. He'd bring Mom flowers, compliment my cooking, and ask me about my work with a feigned interest that never quite reached his eyes. He talked a lot about his success, his clients, his portfolio, always framing it in a way that made him sound both successful and humble, a difficult and often disingenuous act. Mom was completely captivated. She started laughing again, wearing the brighter clothes that had been collecting dust in her closet. She was coming back to life, and because I loved her, I pushed my own reservations down. I told myself I was being overly protective, that my grief was making me cynical. The fragile peace began to change. Our quiet dinners for two became noisy dinners for three. Gary was always there, taking my dad's seat at the head of the table. He'd dominate the conversation with stories about his work or his opinions on the market, topics Mom knew little about but would listen to with rapt attention. He started making little suggestions around the house. "You know, Sandra, a more modern light fixture would really open up this dining room. Or, this garden would have incredible potential with a professional landscaper." Each suggestion felt like a small erasure of my father. I'd bite my tongue, catching the pleading look in my mother's eyes, a look that said, "Please, just let this be. Let me be happy." So I did. I stayed quiet. I ceded space at the dinner table, in the living room, in my mother's heart. I convinced myself this was the price of her happiness. But the peace was no longer just fragile, it was compromised. It was a peace that existed only as long as I didn't object, as long as I pretended not to see the way Gary's gaze lingered on the silver candlesticks, or the way he'd subtly steer my mother away from any decision that didn't benefit him. The house was still quiet when he wasn't there, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of anticipation, the tense quiet before a storm. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this peace was not built to last. It was a temper. Ari truce, and I was about to become a casualty of the war for my mother's new life. The engagement was a whirlwind. Gary proposed to Mom just 6 months after they met, during a fancy dinner at a restaurant I knew Mom couldn't afford. She came home flashing a diamond ring that seemed ostentatious and out of place on her hand. She was giddy, a teenager again, and my heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. When I offered a hesitant congratulations, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "He's going to move in, Janet. We're going to be a real family again." The words were meant to be comforting, but they felt like a betrayal. We already were a family, a broken one, maybe, but still a family. Gary moved his things in 2 weeks after the wedding, a small, rushed affair at the local courthouse. He didn't have much, a few expensive suits, a set of golf clubs, and a framed photo of his late wife that he placed on the mantelpiece, right next to a photo of my dad. The sight of it sent a jolt of anger through me. It felt like an invasion, a colonization of our memories. My mom, however, saw it as a beautiful symbol of their blended hearts. The real trouble started a week later. Gary sat us down in the living room, his arm draped possessively around my mother's shoulders. "Honey," he started, looking at me, "we have a small family situation, and I know you'll be as understanding as your mother." My internal alarms began to scream. He explained that his daughter, Tiffany, was having some trouble with her apartment's lease. She was 22 and, in his words, a budding lifestyle influencer who just needed a stable place to land for a month or two while she sorted things out. "Of course, she can stay here," my mother said immediately, without even looking at me for confirmation. "This is a big house. There's plenty of room." And just like that, Tiffany arrived. She showed up in a taxi overflowing with designer suitcases, her phone already in her hand, recording her entrance for her followers. "Hey guys," she chirped to her screen, panning across our front porch. "Welcome to the new Fam Bam's crib, super vintage, but we're gonna give it a glow up for sure." Tiffany was the human embodiment of entitlement. She treated our home like her personal content studio and hotel. My dad's old study, where I kept some of my drafting equipment and his collection of books, was immediately claimed as her filming room because it had the best natural light. She would leave a trail of chaos in her wake: half-empty mugs, discarded clothes, makeup smudges on the bathroom counters. She played loud music at all hours and had long, dramatic phone conversations in the middle of the hallway. When I tried to set some gentle boundaries, asking her to please clean up after herself or to keep the noise down when I was working, she would pout and run to her father. Gary would then pull me aside, his voice dripping with false concern. "Janet, be a little patient. She's a creative soul. She's sensitive." My mom, desperate to keep the peace and please her new husband, would echo his words. "She's just young, honey. We need to make her feel welcome." But I didn't feel welcome in my own home anymore. I felt like an unpaid, unappreciated groundskeeper. The final straw in this slow-motion train wreck was when I found her in my bedroom, not just filming, but wearing my clothes for one of her haul videos. "And this cute top," she was saying to her phone, "is from my stepsister's closet. She has, like, zero style, so I'm doing her a favor by showing her how to wear it." I saw red. I confronted her, my voice shaking with rage. Tiffany immediately burst into tears, and within minutes, Gary and my mom were there. But they weren't there to support me. They were there to console Tiffany. "Janet, how could you?" my mother said, her face a mask of disappointment. "You embarrassed her." Gary put his arm around a sobbing Tiffany, glaring at me over her head. "I think it's clear who the problem is here," he said, his voice cold and hard. "You're making my daughter feel like an intruder." The irony was so staggering I couldn't even speak. I was the one tiptoeing around, hiding in my room, feeling my space and my memories being trampled and erased, one selfie at a time. Tiffany wasn't just an unwelcome guest. She was a symptom of the disease that had infected my home. Gary was the virus, and my mother was the willing host. They weren't building a new family. they were systematically dismantling mine, and I was next on their demolition list. The atmosphere in the house grew thick with unspoken resentment. I retreated further into myself, spending most of my time in my room or working late at the office. The living room, the kitchen, the garden, they no longer felt like mine. They were occupied territory, filled with the sound of Tiffany's vlogs and Gary's loud phone calls about market volatility. My mother floated through it all with a determined smile, plastered on her face, refusing to acknowledge the tension that was pulling her own home apart at the seams. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon. I walked into the living room and found Tiffany and a couple of her friends trying to move the heavy mahogany bookshelf my father had built, the one he'd spent a year designing and crafting by hand. My stomach plummeted. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Tiffany rolled her eyes, not even bothering to look at me. We're trying to create an accent wall for my new backdrop. This dusty old thing is in the way." "Stop, do not move that," I said, my voice low and shaking with a fury I hadn't felt since she'd invaded my closet. "That was my father's, you don't touch it." One of her friends snickered. Tiffany put her hands on her hips. "Well, it's my dad's house now, so I think we can decide what the accent wall looks like. It's called interior design. Look it up." "It is not your dad's house," I finally exploded. "It's my house, my father left it to me." The argument spiraled from there. Voices were raised. Tiffany called me a jealous freak who was stuck in the past. I told her she was a spoiled, entitled brat who wouldn't know a hard day's work if it hit her in the face. The commotion brought Gary and my mother running. "What is going on here?" Gary demanded, immediately putting a protective arm around Tiffany, who had on cue started to sniffle. "She's attacking me," Tiffany cried. "All I wanted to do was make the room look nicer, and she went crazy." "I told her not to touch Dad's bookshelf," I said, turning to my mother, pleading with my eyes for her to understand. "She called it a dusty old thing." My mother looked from the bookshelf to my face, her expression conflicted for a brief moment before it hardened into something I didn't recognize. It was Gary's influence, his cold logic overlaying her maternal instincts. "Janet," she said, her voice strained, "it is just a piece of furniture. Tiffany is our guest. You are being completely unreasonable." "A piece of furniture?" I repeated, incredulous. "Mom, Dad built that, with his own hands for us." Gary stepped forward, his charming facade gone, replaced by a steely authority. "That's enough," he said. "Sandra and I have been talking. This living arrangement isn't working. Your negative energy is poisoning this home and making it impossible for us to start our new life together. You're constantly undermining my relationship with your mother and making my daughter feel unwelcome." I stared at him, then at my mom. "My negative energy? I live here. This is my home." "No," my mother said, and the single word shattered my world. "This is our home now, and frankly, your attitude has made it a very unhappy one. Gary is right. Maybe you need some time away to think about your behavior. Maybe you should find somewhere else to stay for a while until you can learn to be a part of this new family." The betrayal was so absolute, so profound, that it stole the air from my lungs. She wasn't just taking their side, she was choosing them over me. She was erasing me from my own life, from my own home, from my father's memory. I couldn't form a response. I just turned and walked up to my room, the sound of her words echoing in my ears. I spent the rest of the day in a numb daze. The next morning, I left early for a long walk, trying to clear my head to figure out what to do. When I returned a few hours later, my key wouldn't turn in the front door lock. I tried again, jiggling it, my heart starting to pound with a sick dread. It was no use. They had changed the lock. On the porch next to the door sat my gym bag and a single cardboard box. Inside were a few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, and my laptop. Taped to the box was a note in my mother's handwriting. "Janet, we need some space. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. I'll call you in a few days. Love, Mom." I sank down onto the porch steps, staring at the closed door. The door to the house my father had left me, the place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. They hadn't just kicked me out, they had locked me out. In that moment, the fragile peace, the unwelcome guests, all of it coalesced into a single, cold, hard reality. I had no mother, and I had no home. Shock is a strange, cold blanket. It muffles the world, making everything seem distant and unreal. I sat on that porch step for what felt like hours, the cardboard box beside me a monument to my mother's betrayal. I didn't cry. I was too numb, too hollowed out. Finally, the shiver of the evening air brought me back to reality. I couldn't stay here. My mind scrolled through a short list of options before landing on the only one that felt safe, my college friend Maria. Her voice was a mix of confusion and alarm when I called her, my own voice a monotone croak. "They did what?" she kept saying. "Janet, where are you? I'm coming to get you right now." Staying in Maria's spare room, surrounded by her kindness and the comforting clutter of her life, the numbness began to recede, replaced by waves of grief and white-hot anger. How could she? How could my own mother choose a man she'd known for less than a year, and his vapid daughter over me? How could she throw me out of the house my dad had explicitly left for me? That last thought was the one that stuck, the house my dad left for me. The next morning, armed with a coffee Maria had forced into my hands, I found the number I was looking for, Arthur Vance. He had been my father's lawyer and friend for over 30 years. He de-handled the estate after Dad passed, and his voice, when he answered the phone, was exactly as I remembered. Calm, deep, and authoritative. "Janet, what a surprise, is everything all right?" he asked. The dam broke. The story came pouring out of me in a torrent of hurt and disbelief. Gary, Tiffany, the bookshelf, the changed lock, the box on the porch. I talked until I was hoarse, tears streaming down my face for the first time since it happened. Arthur was silent for a long moment when I finished. The silence wasn't empty, it was heavy, like a gathering storm. "Janet," he finally said, and his voice had lost all its calm. It was now pure steel. "Where are you? Stay there. I want you to come to my office at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Do not contact your mother. Do not go back to the house. Just come and see me." Walking into Arthur Vance's office was like stepping back in time. It was filled with dark wood, leather-bound books, and the faint, pleasant scent of old paper. Arthur, a man of 68 with sharp eyes and a perfectly tailored suit, greeted me not with a handshake but with a comforting hand on my shoulder. He led me into his office and sat me down before retrieving a thick, accordion-style folder from a filing cabinet. He placed it on the desk between us with a soft, definitive thud. "This," he said, tapping the folder, "is your father's legacy. Not just the house, but his foresight." He opened it and pulled out 2 key documents. The first was my father's last will and testament. Arthur turned to a specific page and slid it across the desk to me. His finger pointed to a clause, underlined in red ink. I read the legal jargon, but the meaning was crystal clear. The property located at 123 Maple Drive, its contents, and the surrounding land are to be bequeathed solely and absolutely to my daughter, Janet Miller. It is my express wish that this home provides her with a lifetime of security and happiness. The second document was the deed to the house. There, in clear, unmistakable type, was my name, Janet Miller, owner. "Your father was a meticulous man," Arthur said softly. "He worried about your mother's financial acumen. He wanted to ensure that, no matter what happened, you would always have a roof over your head. That house is yours, Janet. It is legally, ethically, and morally 100% yours. Sandra has 0 ownership rights. 0. A weight I didn't even know I was carrying lifted. It wasn't just my feeling of being wronged. It was a fact, written in ink and certified by the state. "So what they did," I whispered, "is illegal." "What they did," Arthur corrected, his voice hardening, "was perform an illegal eviction. They have established tenancy by living there with your permission, even without a written lease. But that also affords them certain rights. We can't just change the locks back. We have to do this the right way, the legal way, the way that leaves them with no recourse." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. The grief and confusion I'd been drowning in began to morph, forged by the heat of his conviction into something else, something hard and sharp. Resolve. "They have treated you abominably," he said. "They have taken your father's greatest gift to you and used it as a weapon against you. So, we are going to use the power your father gave you to take it back. We will follow the letter of the law, and we will remove them from your property." He paused, letting the words sink in. "The question is, Janet, are you ready?" I looked at the deed, at my name printed so clearly. I thought of my dad's bookshelf, of my mother's cold eyes, of the humiliating little box on the porch. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound. But now it had a purpose. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm ready." The days that followed were a crash course in legal warfare. Arthur Vance's office became my new headquarters, a sanctuary of strategy and cold, hard facts. He walked me through the process step by step, transforming my raw anger into focused, disciplined action. He explained that my mother, Gary, and Tiffany were now considered tenants at will. We couldn't just throw them out, we had to formally terminate their tenancy. The law protects tenants, even the ones who don't pay rent and are behaving atrociously, are. Thur explained, peering at me over his spectacles. But the law also protects property owners. Our approach must be flawless, leaving no loophole for them to exploit, no room for them to claim victimhood in a courtroom. Our first step was to draft the official notice to quit. It was a formal, impersonal document, devoid of the emotion churning inside me. Arthur dictated the language, and I typed, each click of the keyboard feeling like a hammer blow against the life I once knew. The notice gave them 30 days to vacate the premises, as required by state law. It cited no reason, as none was legally required. It was a simple, brutal severance of their right to live in my home. While Arthur handled the legal drafting, he gave me a task: to gather evidence. "In the unlikely event they challenge this," he said, "we want to be prepared to demonstrate why this action was necessary. Document everything, Janet, every memory you have of their behavior." So I did. I sat at Maria's kitchen table for hours, a legal pad and pen in front of me, and I wrote. I wrote about Tiffany turning my dad's study into her studio. I wrote about the party where I found her friends with their feet up on my mother's antique coffee table. I scrolled through my phone, finding the texts from my mom, the ones that started as loving and devolved into pleading, and then finally into dismissive and cold messages siding with Gary. I even found Tiffany's social media pages and took screenshots of the videos she'd filmed in my house, including the one where she'd worn my clothes and the one where she'd called the bookshelf a dusty old thing. Each piece of evidence was a small cut, a reminder of the 1,000 paper cuts that had led to this gaping wound. The process was agonizingly painful, but it was also clarifying. Laying out the facts in a chronological, dispassionate list stripped away the emotional chaos. It wasn't just a family squabble anymore. It was a documented pattern of disrespect, manipulation, and trespass. Gary wasn't just a charming new husband. He was an opportunist who had systematically isolated my mother from her only child. Tiffany wasn't just an annoying stepsister. She was an entitled accomplice. And my mother was a willing participant. That was the hardest part to accept. It would have been easier to believe she was a helpless victim of Gary's manipulation. But the evidence, my own memories, told a different story. She had made a choice. She had chosen his comfort over my security, his daughter's whims over my father's legacy. She had stood by and watched as they dismantled my life in my own home, and then she had held the door for them as they threw me out. Forging the eviction notice was more than a legal step. It was an emotional one. It was the act of acknowledging that the mother I knew was gone. The person living in my house was a stranger named Sandra, and I was treating her as such. A tenant who had violated the terms of her stay. When the final document was printed on heavy, official-looking paper, I held it in my hands. It felt impossibly heavy. This single sheet of paper would detonate the remains of my family. It was a declaration of war. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Maria asked me gently that evening, seeing the look on my face. I thought of my father. I thought of his wish for me to have a lifetime of security and happiness. He hadn't built and maintained that house for a smooth-talking financial advisor and his vlogger daughter. He hadn't left it to me so my own mother could use it as a bribe to keep a new husband happy. He had left it for me. I have to, I told Maria, my voice firm. It's not just about a house anymore, it's about my life. They tried to take it from me, I'm taking it back. The fear and hurt were still there, but now they were a quiet hum beneath a rising chorus of determination. The plan was in place. The notice was forged. The only thing left was to deliver it. The 30-day countdown began on a Tuesday morning. Arthur had strongly advised against me going alone. People are unpredictable when they feel cornered, he'd said. We'll request a civil standby. A sheriff's deputy will accompany you to ensure the peace is kept while you serve the notice. Pulling up to my own house with a police car behind me was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. I felt like a stranger, a visitor, an intruder. The deputy, a calm, professional man named Officer Bryant, met me on the sidewalk. You just hand them the papers, ma'am, he said. I'm just here to make sure things don't get out of hand. I won't interfere unless I have to. I took a deep breath, the legal document clutched in my hand, and walked up the familiar stone path. I rang the doorbell. My mother opened the door, a dish towel in her hand. Her face broke into a relieved smile when she saw me. Janet? Oh, thank goodness, I was so worried. I was going to call you today, I swear. Your phone's been going straight to voicemail. Her smile faltered as she saw Officer Bryant standing behind me. Her eyes darted from his uniform to the official-looking paper in my hand, and her expression curdled into confusion. What? What is this? Why is there a police officer here? I'm here to deliver this, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. I held out the eviction notice. She didn't take it. She just stared at it, then back at my face. Eviction? She whispered, the word sounding alien and absurd. What are you talking about? Gary appeared behind her, drawn by the voices. Sandra, who is it? He saw me, then the deputy, and his charming smile snapped into place, though it didn't reach his eyes. Janet, and an officer, is there a problem? There is, I said, my gaze locking with his. You're being served. I pushed the paper into my mother's limp hand. She looked down at it, her eyes scanning the first few lines. The color drained from her face. Notice to quit, she read aloud, her voice trembling. Vacate the premises, 30 days. This is a joke, right, Janet? This is a cruel, horrible joke. It's not a joke, I said, my voice cold. This is my house. You changed the locks. You put my things on the porch. You illegally evicted me. This is the legal, official remedy. Gary snatched the paper from her hand, his eyes flying across the page. The charming facade finally cracked, shattering to reveal the ugly, grasping man beneath. You can't do this, he snarled. We're family. Sandra is your mother. A mother who threw her own daughter out for a man she's known for 10 months. I shot back. Just then, Tiffany came clattering down the stairs, phone in hand. What is all the yelling about? She saw the deputy and her eyes widened. Oh my God, are we being robbed? Worse, Gary spat, waving the notice at her. Your psycho stepsister is trying to throw us out on the street. Tiffany's jaw dropped. She looked at me, her face a mask of disbelief. You're kicking us out of our house. For the last time, I said, my voice rising, it is not your house. That's when my mother found her voice again, but it was filled with vitriol, not sadness. How could you be so cruel, so ungrateful? After everything I've done for you, I gave you a home your entire life. No, I said, stepping closer to the doorway, forcing them to look at me. Dad gave me this home. You are a guest here. A guest who decided I was disposable. A guest who decided that his things, I gestured toward the living room, and his daughter were less important than your new life. You didn't just kick me out, Mom. You chose them over me. You chose them over Dad's memory. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Tiffany started to cry, loud, theatrical sobs. Gary's face was purple with rage. My mother just stared at me, her face crumpled in a mixture of shock and dawning horror. She finally seemed to understand that this was real. You have 30 days to vacate, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. If you are not gone by then, Officer Bryant or one of his colleagues will be back to remove you forcibly. All communication from this point forward will go through my lawyer, Arthur Vance. His card is attached to the notice. I turned without another word and walked away. I didn't look back. As I reached the sidewalk, I could hear the screaming start, a cacophony of rage and disbelief. But for the first time in months, the noise wasn't inside my house. It was contained within those walls, and I was on the outside, walking toward my own future. The next 30 days were a war of attrition. They tried everything. First came the phone calls. My mother left dozens of voicemails, her tone shifting wildly between tearful pleading and furious accusation. "Janet, you are tearing this family apart," one message screamed. "Gary is a good man, you're just jealous." The next would be a sobbing wreck. "Please, baby, don't do this to me. Where will we go? I'm your mother." I listened to the first few, my heart twisting in knots before Arthur advised me to stop. "Let me handle it," he said firmly. I blocked her number, and Gary's and Tiffany's. Then came the guilt trips through relatives. My aunt, my mother's sister, called to tell me I was being heartless and selfish. I calmly explained that my mother had changed the locks on me and thrown me out. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. They had only been told one side of the story, the one where I was the ungrateful, problem child. The most pathetic attempt came from Gary. He had Arthur's number and he tried to negotiate. He offered to have Tiffany move out. He offered to pay rent, a laughable pittance that wouldn't even cover the property taxes. Arthur dismissed him curtly every time. "The notice is non-negotiable," he would report back to me. "The 30-day period stands." Through it all, I stayed why. Maria, drawing strength from her unwavering support. I focused on my work, pouring my hurt and anger into the clean, logical lines of my architectural drafts. I was designing a new life for myself, one blueprint at a time. On the 30th day, a crisp autumn morning, I met Arthur and 2 sheriff's deputies at the house. My stomach was in knots. I had no idea what I would find. The keys Gary had been forced to leave with Arthur turned smoothly in the new lock I'd already had a locksmith prepare. The house was silent. They were gone. But they had not gone quietly. The house was a disaster. Not damaged, but vindictively, spitefully messy. Trash was left in the kitchen, half-eaten food rotting in the fridge. The bathrooms were filthy. In the living room, a deep, fresh scratch ran across the top of my father's bookshelf, a final, petty act of defiance. And on the wall in my bedroom, written in what looked like Tiffany's garish red lipstick, were the words, "Happy now, psycho." Seeing that, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt pity. It was the pathetic, final act of people who had lost and had nothing left but their own ugliness. Arthur saw my face and put a hand on my shoulder. "Let's get a cleaning crew in here, Janet." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I need to do this myself." And so began the reclamation. I spent the next 2 weeks purging the house of their presence. I threw out every last thing they'd left behind. I scrubbed the floors, washed the walls, and aired out every room. I hired a furniture restorer, an old craftsman, who looked at the scratch on the bookshelf with sad eyes and promised he could make it look like new. The day he finished, I ran my hand over the smooth, perfect wood and cried, not for my mother, but for my father, and for the near loss of his legacy. I rearranged the furniture, moving everything back to the way it was when Dad was alive, but with my own touches. I filled the house with new plants and my own art. I turned my dad's old study, Tiffany's filming room, back into a quiet, peaceful library and workspace for myself. I scrubbed the lipstick off my bedroom wall until the paint was raw, and then I repainted the entire room in a calm, serene shade of blue. The house began to breathe again. It was no longer a battleground or a compromised territory. The silence returned, but it wasn't the heavy, grief-stricken silence from before. It was a light, peaceful silence. It was the sound of home. My mother never tried to contact me directly again. I heard from my aunt that Gary's financial advising was not as lucrative as he'd claimed, and they were renting a small, cramped apartment across town. Tiffany, apparently, had moved back in with them, her influencer career having stalled. I sometimes feel a pang of sadness for the mother I lost, the woman who existed before Gary. But I don't feel guilt. She made her choice, and in doing so, she forced me to make mine. I chose my father's legacy. I chose my security, my sanity, and my future. I chose myself. Standing in the living room now, with the evening sun slanting through the clean windows and the scent of lemon polish in the air, I feel at peace. This house isn't just a structure of wood and nails. It's the home my dad built, the home he left for me, and the home I fought to reclaim. It is, in every sense of the word, mine.